When everything in the world preaches to you strength, be strong, we sing, I may be weak. I am weak, but your spirit is strong in me. Amazing. All you little ones out there, you are now dismissed to go with Mrs. Eddins, if you'd like. After a whole year of marriage, that's still kind of awesome to say, by the way. Mrs. Eddins. Sorry, never mind. Moving on. So, brothers and sisters, if you have a Bible this morning, I want to go back and I want to look at the passage that Gary read to us this morning, the passage out of Mark. And specifically, I want to look at one verse in that passage, okay? So just to recap what Gary read to us this morning. So a guy brings his son to Jesus, and he says his son has had a demon in him since childhood. And this demon is causing this son to convulse, and all these crazy things are happening to his son, to the point where the demon is even trying to kill the son by hurling him into fire and trying to get him to drown himself in water. I mean, crazy, crazy stuff. And so he brings him to Jesus, and for some reason he says he brought him to Jesus' disciples, but for whatever reason the disciples couldn't do it. They couldn't heal this guy, this boy, of his demon possession. So he brings him to Jesus and he says, if there's anything you can do. And we look back now and we go, are you serious? He would ask that question to Jesus, if there's anything you can do. And even Jesus himself in this passage, you sense there's a little bit of irritation on the part of Jesus, because he repeats the guy's words right back to him. He says, if there's anything I can do, anything is possible for the person that believes, that has faith. And then this is the verse I want to focus in on this morning. In verse 24, immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Now that kind of seems like it's a paradox, right? Okay, well, which one is it? Do you believe or do you not believe? Do you have faith or do you not have faith? And it seems like this boy's dad was struggling with something kind of in between. And it's this word that today we call doubt. And so today I just want to have a conversation. I just want to have a conversation about what faith is and what doubt is, okay? Because if you're like me, if you grew up in the church, there are a lot of churches that seem to kind of they have a lot of different teachings about what faith is and what doubt is. And the most critical one that a lot of churches teach is that faith and doubt are complete opposites. That you cannot have one and have the other one. If you doubt, it means you do not have faith. If you don't have faith, then you're going to doubt. And if you have faith, you will not doubt, ever. There's no in between here. In my own life, and more importantly in the scriptures, I have found this teaching to be without a doubt, pun intended, without a doubt, completely and utterly false. Just to see this in the scriptures. And so I want to offer you some observations about what faith turns out to be. And for the record, I don't want this to be this is Andrew's point of view, and I have to agree with it, or else I'm not a Christian, or else I'm going to be hurled out of Fountain of Life Church forever and ever, okay? That's not the point here. The point is not for me to convince you that I'm right, okay? The point is simply to offer you a different perspective on what faith is and what doubt is, a different perspective than what you may have been taught growing up in the traditional American church, okay? So that's the goal here. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is that we got to get through what faith is first, so that we can arrive back at what this dad in the Bible was struggling with, doubt, okay? But first, let's start with faith, all right? So before we get to what faith is, we have to establish what faith is not. Okay? Because there are four distinct kind of teachings that I have discovered, and I'm just going off of my own experiences here in the Christian church. There are four things that I was taught growing up about what faith is. And through the scripture writers don't seem to agree with this. So the first thing that faith is not, okay? Number one, faith is not intellectual agreement. So in other words, faith is not just something that you simply agree with in your head, that it's true. Like when you were a kid and you were taught that 2 plus 2 is 4, and you came to a place where you agreed that was right in your head. That's not faith, okay? So like if I tell you that Jesus died for your sins and that he rose from the dead on Easter Sunday, and you agree with me that that's correct, it's great that you agree with me, but that's not faith. That's not what faith turns out to be. And sadly, that's a big teaching in a lot of Christian churches, that faith is just simply agreeing with somebody that is true. But that's not faith. Number 2, faith is not something you have to muster up. And this is kind of a big one. This kind of goes along the lines of number 1. But there's a lot of times where churches will act like you gotta, like right before you pray, you gotta muster up all this faith before you pray. And if your prayer is not answered, it's because you didn't muster up enough faith in that moment. And I don't know if this sounds familiar to you, but like if you're praying for like Grandma June to be healed of her disease and it doesn't happen, and a church would look at you and say, well, you didn't have enough faith. You didn't have enough faith in that moment because your prayer was not answered. Now, why is this a problem? How many of you have ever been to like a carnival or like the OC Fair? I was just chatting with Dan about carnivals and fairs with Pat as well. We got the OC Fair going on in Costa Mesa where you spend way too much money for a fried Oreo, or the LA Fair's happening soon. But most of us have been to a carnival or a fair. You could throw up the image if you would, Mark. Okay, so everyone knows what this is, right? Like we have all seen one of these in our lives. Does anyone, I just learned this week actually what this thing is called. Does anyone know what this is actually called? If you know it, shout it out. Ring the bell. Sorry, Gary. That's the verb. Yes, you ring the bell. It's the ring the bell machine. Maggie? The what? Close. Oh man, very close. Anyone else have any guesses? It's called the high striker. Yeah. I had no idea. The technical word is the high striker. I've lived my whole life knowing what this thing, or like recognizing this thing, but not knowing what it was. So a high striker, it's very simple. You have the hammer, you hit the padding on below, and you try to get the lever all the way up to ring the bell, as Gary said. Ring the bell ringer. So if to you faith is something that you have to muster up, then it's going to be like a high striker, where you have to hit, you swing the hammer, and you got to hit a certain point, and if you don't hit it high enough to hit the bell, it means you didn't swing hard enough. You didn't do a good enough job. So faith to you would mean I got to muster up enough faith to an acceptable point, and if I don't hit that mark, it means I didn't have enough faith. I didn't muster up enough faith in that moment. So there's a mark I've got to hit. Now, why is this a problem? Well, Jesus comes along, and Jesus makes statements like, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. You can do great things, even if you have just the smallest amount of faith. So evidently, faith is not something that you have to like muster up so that you can hit an acceptable mark. All right? Number 3, faith is not a verbal proclamation. Okay? And this may be arguably the biggest one. In other words, just because you say you believe something, brothers and sisters, does that mean you believe it? No, of course not. Let's enter politicians, shall we? I mean, like this is the world they live in, right? A politician will say all these different things that they believe to be true, but does that mean they actually believe them? No, they have an agenda, and they will say whatever they can say to get you to vote for them. Now, here's the shocking thing. Pastors can be politicians if they want, can't they? I mean, it's true. Like, I need you to come to my church, so I will say whatever I think you want to hear so that you will come to my church. So that you get people, I mean, like, think of the preachers that are saying, Jesus wants to give you more money. Jesus wants to increase your finances. I mean, who's not going to go to a church where the preacher is saying that? Well, yeah, if I'm walking on the street and I don't have any money and the preacher's saying, Jesus wants to increase my finances, well, okay, I'm coming on in. Like that is a danger that we as pastors can abuse this power of preaching if we're not careful. Because we can just say whatever we want, whatever we think you need to hear, whatever you want to hear, just to get you to come and fill up the seats. But as we see in faith, faith is not just saying you believe something. Another good example is, what did we just profess to each other? The creed. Creed is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful reminder. But is simply reciting the creed, does that mean I believe all the things that I'm reciting? No. That's not what faith turns out to be. I mean, it's a big thing in the Lutheran church. And this is where us Lutherans can possibly get ourselves into trouble, okay? And what I'm about to say to you may result in the Lutheran police coming, dragging me off to like St. Louis prison, okay? So if that happens, it's been a privilege being your pastor. It really has. Lutherans, we tend to be all about the words. Like we're very emphatic on the words. Like just get the words out and God will do the rest. And there are certain things where that is 100% true. Baptism, where there is water and the word of God, it's a valid baptism. Lord's Supper, where there is the bread, the wine, and the word of God, it's a valid communion. But sometimes we'll take that even farther to be like in preaching, in witnessing to somebody about Jesus, in preaching the gospel. It's like just get the words out there, and it doesn't really matter whether you're passionate, whether you have conviction, whether you even believe that or not. Don't worry about it. God's going to do the rest. I was a few years ago, and I'm sure many of you have had encounters like this. I was visited by two Mormon missionaries, and this wasn't even at my house. It was like in a parking lot, which was very interesting. They just kind of caught me as I was like taking my groceries to my car. I was like, sweet, bring it on. But it was very evident from this interaction that it was just kind of like the lights were on but nobody was home kind of idea when this person was spieling to me the things that they believed to be true. You know, there was just really no passion, there was no conviction, there was no like convincing me, right, that this person actually believed the things that they were saying. So am I going to be convinced in that moment that that person believes, that that person has faith, given the way that they're delivering the words to me? Probably not. Now, on the other end, I have been visited by Mormon missionaries that I actually respected them because they had a lot of conviction in what they were saying to me. It was evident that they believed what they were saying. And I could look at them and say, I may disagree with you, but I have a lot of respect for you because you have passion in what you're saying. I believe that you believe what the words that you're saying. But faith to us is not just simply words. It's not just saying you believe something. It's not verbal proclamation. Finally, number 4, faith is not having good theology. Theology is a fancy word of saying just truths about God. The truth about God, the truth about Jesus, the truth about Christianity. At seminary, man, they are all about good theology. Like making sure every hymn we sing is theologically sound, everything we preach, everything we teach, everything we write, making sure it's all theologically accurate. And is that important? You bet. But what can result from that, if we're not careful, is this temptation to be right. Like, my faith is just bent on being right. Married folks, how important is it to you to be right? A lot, right? There's no escaping it. Oftentimes, we pride ourselves in the times when we are right. And even like social media is a good example. A lot of times, defending our faith looks like we think that means getting into an argument with somebody on Facebook about religion and not stopping until that person is convinced that we are right. And this is where, man, if I wanted to draw this out even more, I would confess to you right now that this week Your pastor actually fell into that a little bit. I actually got into an argument on Facebook. The thing that I preach against all the time, I did it. I came away from it going, that was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. Like, what's the point? Did that really solve anything? But it's not about being right. It's not about having good theology. That's not faith. You want to know who had the best theology in the Bible? Demons. Demons had the best theology. The demons knew exactly who Jesus was. There would be many times that there'd be a circumstance where the demons were the only ones in the area that knew exactly who Jesus was. Oftentimes, you'd get a time where somebody was being possessed by a demon, and Jesus would show up, and the demon would speak and say, I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God. But would you say that a demon has faith? Probably not. And the book of James says, oh, you believe that there's only one God? Well, good for you. Even demons believe that. Demons have the best theology. I mean, even look at the passage that Gary read to us this morning. In verse 20, we're dealing with a demon-possessed boy. And it says, so they brought him to Jesus. When the spirit or the demon saw Jesus, what did it do? It immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. So it's almost like this demon, once he sees Jesus, he has to try even harder to get this boy completely possessed. Why? Because he knows. He knows who Jesus is. So demons have great theology. They know the truths about who God is, about who Jesus is, but that's not faith. Theology about God is not faith. So, we've talked about what faith is not. So what is faith? Well, the scripture writers seem to be bent towards this belief, that faith is action based on trust. Faith is action based on trust. If you have faith, then you will trust. And if you trust, then that will be reflected in the way you live your life. It just will. Your actions will show your faith. Because we just talked about, look at the people that Jesus said had no faith in his ministry. People like the Pharisees, who they went along the lines of one of our topics of not having faith, right? He said, you praise me with your lips. You're all talk. You're all verbal proclamation. But your hearts are far from me. Those are the people that Jesus chastised for not having faith. But what about the people in the Bible that Jesus praised for their faith? What were they doing? What type of things were they doing? Some of the most famous ones that come to mind, you got the woman who was bleeding for 12 years. You can't even imagine that kind of pain and suffering for 12 years. And she sees Jesus in a crowd, and she fights as hard as she can to get through that crowd just so she can touch the hem of Jesus' robe, because she believes that even that will heal her. So she fights as hard as she can to get to Jesus, and she touches his robe, and she's healed. And Jesus turns around, and what does Jesus do? Does he scold her? Does he push her away? Does he say, you're interrupting me? No. He says, go in peace. Your faith has saved you. It wasn't her saying she believed. It was her fighting through the crowd. The action of believing that Jesus was who he said he was. That was the faith. You got the other example of the guys who they have their buddy who's a paralytic, and they're trying to get their buddy to Jesus so he can heal them, but the house that Jesus is in is so crowded, it's packed. So that what do? They go up on the roof, and there's a hole in the roof, so they lower their buddy down on a mat through the roof, right in front of Jesus' feet. It's amazing stuff. And what does Jesus do? Does he scold them? Does he swear at them? Does he say, get out of my way? Does he say, why is there a hole in the roof? Someone's got to fix this roof? No. The text tells us when Jesus saw their great faith, it was the actions. They believed that Jesus could heal them, and their actions reflected that. So if you trust, if you have faith, it will always show in your life. Always. There's no getting around this. There's no escaping this in our life. Mark, you can throw up the other image if you'd like. Okay. Everyone knows what this is, right? Please tell me that. Yes, Golden Gate Bridge. Cue the Full House theme song for those of you that are my generation. We'll see. But Golden Gate Bridge. How many of you have ever actually driven across it? Or even like just been on a bus or something? You've crossed it in some way. Awesome. So the Golden Gate Bridge, if I'm going to cross the Golden Gate Bridge, how much faith do I have to have? Like, how much faith do I really have to have that, like, all the beams are stable and they're in good, that the structure, it's structurally sound? How much faith do I have to have in my car that all the mechanisms and parts are going to work properly, that the car's not going to, like, veer off and I'm going to fall into the Pacific Ocean? Like, how much faith do I have to have in the people that built that bridge years and years and years ago, and that all the steel is going to hold up and that it's not going to collapse? How much faith do I have to have? A lot. I have to have a lot of faith, don't I? To trust that everything is going to go right and that I'm not going to fall off that bridge. Now imagine if I was driving to that bridge and you're in the car with me, and on the way to that bridge, I'm just talking about how much faith I have in that bridge. And man, like, it's so safe. We're going to make it across. Like, I believe in this bridge. It's so strong and sturdy, and it stood the test of time. It's awesome. I believe in that bridge. But then right as we get to the entrance of the bridge, last minute, I chicken out. And I drive somewhere else. I don't go over the bridge. What are you going to think about what I just told you on the drive to the bridge? You're going to think I'm full of it, right? Like, what is my faith just telling you that I believed in the bridge? Like, if I don't cross the bridge, do you believe that I have faith in that bridge? No. So what's the faith? Crossing it. Crossing the bridge is the evidence of my faith. That is simply it. So we can say that we have faith. We can tell other people we have faith, but ultimately, the faith is not the telling. The evidence of my faith is the living. It's actually how I live my life. And I'm telling you, this shows up, this is going to peek its little head out in your life. If you trust God to provide for you, then you won't worry about money. You will be generous with your finances. You won't be greedy with the things that you have. You just won't, because it's evidence of your faith. And on the opposite end, if you don't trust God to provide for you, if you don't trust in God's goodness, what are you going to do? You're going to be a hoarder. You're going to be greedy with the things that you have. You won't be generous. You won't give to those that need it. You just won't. You'll be jealous of other people's wealth, won't you? It will always show the evidence of your faith or the evidence of your lack of faith. It will always be shown by how you live your life. And to some of us in this room, that's encouraging news. To others in this room, that's incredibly depressing news, isn't it? But we cannot escape it. The evidence of our faith will be found in our life, plain and simple. Now, here is where doubt comes in, okay? The D word. It might as well be a curse word in a lot of churches, right? Because, like, there are a lot of churches that I've been to personally that they give off this vibe that it's almost like a sin to doubt, right? Like, you just have blind faith and don't ever doubt. But if we use this bridge example, if we talk about what faith is, based on what we just talked about, and faith is not a verbal proclamation of the strength of the bridge, it's not like an intellectual agreement that the bridge is safe, but it's actually crossing the bridge. That's faith. If we're going off of that example, then you're going to tell me that even those of you that have crossed that bridge, that you were 100% certain the whole time that that bridge was not going to collapse? Even those of you that are afraid of heights, you're going to tell me that as you were crossing, even if you like looked over the ledge, that there's not even like a twinge of doubt in you, that bridge might give way, that you might fall, we actually find that doubt is found all throughout the scriptures. And not just by like the quote unquote bad characters, okay? Like some of these I want to show you right now a few verses where like these are the best of the best. These are the Bible rock stars, okay? These are the guys that walked so closely with God and yet struggled with doubt. Let's start with Moses. Moses was regarded by the scriptures as the greatest prophet, the greatest man, the greatest person that ever lived up until the point of Jesus. That's how awesome Moses was in the Old Testament. So Moses first encounters God, and we all know this story. God is in the form of a burning bush, and he tells Moses that he's going to free his people from Egypt, and that Moses is going to be the one to do it. He's going to do it through Moses. We all remember that encounter, but what we fail to remember is that 5 times in that conversation, Moses doubts, questions, and argues with God. 5 different times until he eventually gives in and does it. Here's one of those interactions. Exodus 4. Moses answered, "What if they do not, the Egyptians, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? And what if they say the Lord did not appear to you?" Pure doubt, pure questioning. How about Abraham? Good old Father Abraham. We got a great song dedicated to that guy. So God promises Abraham, he promises him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the beach. And then he promises him land. He says you're going to have like land as far as the eye can see, and it's going to be flowing with milk and honey. And that doesn't mean a lot to us today. But back then, like land, free land, it was like hitting the lottery. So God promises all these things to Abraham, and Father Abraham says this, Genesis 15. But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" Like even after all these promises that God makes to Abraham, Abraham still says, "Give me proof. How am I going to know for certain?" He doubts God's goodness. He doubts God's promises. He questions them. He wrestles with them. And finally, we get to King David. King David was considered a man after God's own heart. He walked so closely and so intimately with God that God said the Messiah is going to come from the line of David. That's how close David was with God. And for any of you that have spent some time in the Psalms, I mean, if you're ever going through something, like really going through something, if it's a season where it's just hard, dive into the Psalms. Because you're not just going to find like happy, praiseworthy psalms, are you? From some of these psalms come some of the most raw, brutally honest statements towards God. Here's one, Psalm 13. "How long, Lord?" Like how much longer am I going to go through this, Lord? "Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts day after day, have sorrow in my heart?" This was a man that was after God's own heart. And you don't think this sounds like doubting, like questioning? I mean, almost to the point where he's even questioning God's existence. Where are you, God? I look for you and I can't find you. Why are you hiding your face from me, God? I mean, if King David were alive today, a lot of Christian churches might look at David and say, King David, have faith. Don't doubt. You're doubting because you don't have enough faith. You got to have faith and then you're never going to doubt again. Here's the point. Here's the point of all of this. Notice how God responds to all 3 of these Bible rock stars, okay? Does he just like hurl Moses, Abraham, and David into hell? Does he zap them? Does he like rain down fireballs on them? No. He's patient with Moses. He forgives David. And he's faithful to the promises of Abraham. Even in the midst of our doubt, even when we doubt God's very faithfulness, the crazy thing is that God still remains faithful amidst our doubts. He still remains faithful even when we doubt his very faithfulness. And so it turns out that doubting was actually for the benefit of these three guys. Why? Because of how God responded. So it turns out that they were free to doubt within the relationship that they had with God. And we call that a covenant, right? We call that a covenantal relationship because, see, there's a difference between doubting on the outside of God's grace and doubting on the inside of God's grace. When Kristen and I got married, before we got married and we were just dating, right, for a few years, that was the time when we have the doubts, we have the questions, we're able to ask, is this really somebody that I can see myself marrying? Can I really trust this person? Those are the times when you ask those questions and you doubt, and there's always the potential, right, that the answer is going to be no. No, I don't think I can marry this person. I can't really trust this person. There's always the potential for that to be the answer. But once we said I do, then we entered into a covenant with each other. And a covenant is different than a contract, brothers and sisters. A contract has stipulations and rules that says if you do this, if you break the stipulations, then this consequence is going to happen to you. The only reason we have contracts in this world is because we don't trust people, right? We don't trust each other. That's the only reason we have contracts. If everyone trusted each other 100%, there'd be no need for ever drawing up a contract. But that's not what a covenant is. A covenant is a promise that you make to the other person saying, I am yours and you are mine. That is final. That is the final word. And so within that covenant now, you're free to doubt, you're free to question, you're free to wrestle with the big questions that you have, you're free to struggle. So whenever Kristen and I get into an argument, or dare I say it, a fight, what? Anytime that ever happens, do I wake up the next morning and wonder if we're still married? Do I lay in bed questioning, is she still my wife? Am I still her husband? No, because we have created this covenantal relationship within this marriage. So we are free to ask questions, to argue with each other, to bicker back and forth, not worrying if the next morning we're still going to be married. Now, I know that this analogy cuts off at a certain point, right? Because there are those of you that might question, well, what if there's infidelity? What if there's physical abuse in that marriage? And that's where I would say that's where marriage and the relationship between us and God is different now, okay? The point of all of this is that as Christians, we are in a covenantal relationship with our God. When God put Jesus up on that cross, he made a covenant with you that said, you are mine and I am yours. So now you are free. You are free not just from sin, not just from death, but you're now free to have doubts, to wrestle, to struggle in the same way that David asked, where are you, God? And yet was still in God's favor. We're free to doubt and wrestle, and at the same time not worry, is God done with me now? Am I out of God's grace now because I doubted, because I wrestled? Is God just going to zap me? Am I eternally condemned now? Have I fallen out of that faith, out of that grace? And that's where we go back to what faith ultimately is. As Christians, we doubt. We just do. It's still a part of our sinful nature because we're a part of a sinful world. But always remember the bridge. Always remember the bridge. The doubting that you're going through on that bridge, it's real, it's tangible, it's happening, but it's happening while you're still crossing it. You are in motion as you cross it. So as Christians, our doubt is real. It's happening. When we question, it's real, it's tangible, but it's happening in our life of faith. As we're living this out, as we're growing and being strengthened every day by God. So here's the thing. If we want our church to thrive, if we want this to be a safe haven, a refuge for people to know Jesus better, this had better, listen to me. If you weren't listening at all, this is the time to listen now. Zero in. This had better be a place where we are free to doubt, we're free to wrestle, we're free to have questions, we're free to struggle. We're even free to say what King David said in the Psalms thousands of years ago, God, where are you? We're free to have those kind of conversations because we know that we are safe in the arms of Jesus and that that's not going to change. If we doubt, God's not going to kick us out of the door. That God has put his son on the cross, and through that we are saved. So this has to be a place where we're free to doubt, because any Christian that comes to you and tells you they've never had doubts is lying to your face. I promise you. I promise you wholeheartedly. I've met some people that I thought were the most spiritual, like almost perfect people in the world, and then eventually they come to me and they say, like, I've had doubts in my life. I've had issues. I've had struggles. I mean, even some of the most famous people, Mother Teresa, she wrote a whole book of memoirs towards the end of her life talking about the doubts that she experienced. Martin Luther struggled with doubt his whole life. But ultimately, what was the point? That they were safe in the arms of Jesus. And that was the point. And the good news here is that doubt actually turns out to be a form of worship, doesn't it? Because when you're saying what King David said, where are you, God? Why do you hide your face from me, God? Who are you still talking to? God. You're still engaging in that relationship. You're still directing it towards him, which is what God wants you to do in the first place. If you have doubts, that's fine, but direct those doubts towards me. Stay in the relationship with me. Still engage in this covenant that we have created. And ultimately, we go back to the dad who started this whole conversation. And what did he say? Lord, I believe, but help me to overcome the times when I have unbelief. Help me to overcome those times, those seasons in my life when I just doubt your goodness. Lord, I have faith in you, and I'm living that out. But there are times when I struggle. I wrestle. I question whether you're good, whether you're even here. Help me to overcome those and to continue to live in this covenantal relationship, because ultimately I know that you are mine and I am yours, and that's what matters. Would you pray with me?